year 70 AD, the city of Jerusalem, the sacred heart of the Jewish people, was turned into a vision of hell. The historian Flavius Josephus, an eyewitness to the horror, wrote that the rivers of blood were stronger than the flames, and that the ground itself couldn't be seen beneath the piles of bodies. The destruction was so absolute, it said that visitors to the ruins could scarcely believe the city had ever been inhabited at all. This was the climax of the great Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire. A war that ended with one of the most brutal and catastrophic sieges in human history. But this wasn't a simple story of a mighty empire crushing a small rebellion. The fall of Jerusalem wasn't just a product of Roman military genius or overwhelming force. The city was already eating itself alive. It was doomed by an explosive cocktail of political betrayals, fanatical infighting, and the heartbreaking collapse of a society pushed beyond its limits. This is the real story of how a city and a people were torn apart, not just from the outside, but from within. 70 AD. Inside the ancient walls of Jerusalem, a mother does the unthinkable. Driven mad by a famine so severe it was turning people into monsters, she kills her own infant son, roasts his body, and eats half. When rebel soldiers, smelling the cooked meat, burst into her home threatening to kill her, she offers them the leftovers. They run away in horror. Outside the walls, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, the most powerful and disciplined army on earth, are preparing to wipe the city from existence. This was one of the most brutal sieges in history. But the city's fall wasn't just sealed by Roman might. It was guaranteed by explosive political betrayals and the bitter civil war raging inside the walls, a conflict that had already condemned its people long before the first Roman siege tower ever arrived. To understand the fall of Jerusalem, you have to understand the decades of rage that came before it. First-century Judea was a province on a knife's edge. Ever since the Roman general Pompey had captured the city in 63 BCE, a tense, often violent relationship festered between the Roman occupiers and their Jewish subjects. For Rome, Judea was just another province to be taxed and controlled. But for the Jewish people, this was their sacred homeland, a place where their unique monotheistic faith was their identity. The Roman authorities, however, showed a stunning lack of sensitivity and sometimes outright contempt for Jewish religious traditions. Roman governors, known as procurators, were often corrupt men who saw their job as a chance to get rich through crippling taxes. They made one terrible mistake after another, committing acts the people saw as sacrilege, like parading Roman standards, which were worshipped as idols, through the holy city of Jerusalem. Things finally boiled over with the arrival of the last and most infamous procurator, Gessius Florus. Florus was a man of spectacular greed and cruelty. In 66 CE, he marched into Jerusalem and plundered 17 talents of silver from the Second Temple's treasury, claiming it was for the emperor. This was the ultimate violation. The temple wasn't just a building, it was the dwelling place of God on earth, the very center of Jewish life. The act was so shameless, so insulting, that the people of Jerusalem erupted. Some openly mocked Florus, passing a basket around to collect charity for their impoverished governor. Florus answered with brute force. He unleashed his soldiers on the city, who looted homes and killed thousands of citizens, whether they were part of the protests or not. But this act of terror didn't crush the rebellion. It ignited it. A radical faction known as the Zealots, who believed that only God should rule over them, seized the moment. They stormed the Antonia fortress, the Roman garrison overlooking the Temple Mount, and wiped out its defenders. Then, they stopped the daily sacrifices made in honor of the Roman emperor, a clear declaration of war. The Great Revolt had begun. In the first few months, it really seemed like a miracle was happening. The rebels, fueled by pure fury, actually managed to kick the Roman forces out of Jerusalem, the revolution spread like wildfire. Rome's first major attempt to crush the rebellion ended in a humiliating disaster. The governor of Syria, Cestius Gallus, marched on Jerusalem with an entire legion, the 12th Fulminata. He broke through the outer walls and camped right outside the city. Victory seemed certain. The historian Josephus, who was there, wrote that if Gallus had just pushed forward at that moment, the war would have been over. But then, for reasons that still baffle historians, Gallus hesitated and ordered a retreat. It was a catastrophic mistake. The retreating Romans were ambushed and torn apart by Jewish fighters. The mighty 12th Legion was shattered, and its eagle standard was captured, the ultimate disgrace for a Roman legion. This stunning victory created a dangerous fantasy of invincibility. A provisional government was set up in Jerusalem, and for a brief moment, an independent Jewish state seemed real. But this unity was tragically brief. The very success that should have united them instead revealed the deep, bitter cracks in their society. As soon as the common enemy was gone, the defenders of Jerusalem turned on each other. The city fell into a brutal civil war. It was a chaotic free-for-all between multiple factions, each with its own leader and its own agenda. On one side were the Zealots, led by the fiery Eleazar ben Simon, who saw any compromise with Rome as an insult to God. Then there was John of Gischala, a cunning rebel leader who brought his own army into the city after fleeing the Roman advance. He saw himself as the rightful leader of the whole revolt. And finally, there was Simon bar Giora, a charismatic but ruthless warrior who had raised a huge army of peasants. He was invited into Jerusalem by citizens who hoped he would save them from John's tyranny. He didn't bring peace. He brought a third army into the already crowded and blood-soaked streets. These three factions fought each other with savage intensity. They slaughtered one another's followers and terrorized the people, battling for control of the city, block by block. And in a final, insane act of self-destruction, they burned the city's food supplies. Granaries filled with enough grain to last for years were set on fire, either to force everyone to fight or simply to deny resources to a rival. This single act of betrayal, born from paranoia and ego, would have consequences more horrifying than anyone could imagine. It sealed Jerusalem's fate long before the Romans ever returned. While Jerusalem was busy destroying itself, the Roman Empire was preparing its revenge. The humiliation of Cestius Gallus could not stand. Emperor Nero sent his most capable general, Vespasian, to crush the revolt once and for all. Vespasian was not a man who made rash decisions. He was methodical, patient, and completely ruthless. With his son, Titus, at his side, Vespasian arrived in Judea with a massive force, 4 legions plus auxiliaries, making up a war machine of around 50,000 troops forged in centuries of conquest. Vespasian's strategy was slow, grinding suffocation. He didn't march straight for Jerusalem. Instead, he spent 2 years patiently pacifying the surrounding regions, starting in Galilee. He isolated and destroyed rebel strongholds one by one, cutting Jerusalem off from any possible help. The Jewish commander in Galilee at the time was none other than the man who would write this history, Josephus. After a brave but hopeless defense of a fortress, Josephus surrendered and, in a remarkable twist, managed to win Vespasian's favor, eventually becoming an advisor and historian for the Romans. By the summer of 70 CE, the Roman war machine was ready for the final push. Despite the horrific conditions, the Jewish defenders, now fighting with the terrifying strength of people with nothing left to lose, kept resisting. The focus of the final battle was the Antonia fortress, the citadel guarding the Temple Mount. For weeks, the Romans battered its walls and fought brutal hand-to-hand battles in the breaches. Finally, in late July, the Romans overwhelmed the fortress's exhausted defenders. The capture of the Antonia fortress was the turning point. It gave the Romans a direct staging ground for their assault on the temple itself. The Temple Mount became the last desperate sanctuary for the remaining fighters. The climax came on the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av, a date already heavy with tragedy, as it was the very same day the first temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians centuries before. As Roman soldiers fought their way into the temple courts, the battle reached a fever pitch of carnage. Josephus describes the war cries of the legions, the yells of the rebels encircled by fire and sword, and the shrieks of the people. Corpses piled up around the altar, and a stream of blood flowed down the temple's steps. According to Josephus, Titus had given orders to save the temple building, a structure famous throughout the world. He wanted to preserve it as a monument to Roman victory. But in the chaos and fury of the battle, his orders were ignored. A Roman soldier, acting on his own, grabbed a firebrand and shoved it into one of the temple's chambers. The fire spread with terrifying speed. The ancient dry timbers ignited, and the magnificent building was quickly swallowed by a raging inferno. As the flames shot into the sky, a collective scream of agony rose from the defenders and the people watching from the city. Many, seeing their sacred sanctuary lost the will to live, and either charged into Roman swords or threw themselves into the fire. The heat was so intense that the massive stone walls of the temple cracked and collapsed. With the temple destroyed, the heart of the resistance was broken. The Romans systematically purged the rest of the city, slaughtering almost everyone they found. John of Gischala and Simon bar Giora, the rival leaders whose political betrayals had cost their people everything, were finally captured. By September, the entire city was under Roman control. Jerusalem had fallen. The destruction of Jerusalem wasn't the end of the story. It was a cataclysm that would reshape the future of two world religions. In the aftermath, the city was systematically razed. Only a few towers and a piece of the western wall were left standing, a stark monument to the city's former strength and the Roman power that had crushed it. The human cost was staggering. Josephus claims over 1 million people died. While modern historians believe that number is an exaggeration, there's no doubt the scale of the slaughter and enslavement was immense. The rebel leaders, Simon and John, were dragged to Rome in chains to be paraded in Titus's triumphal procession. The treasures from the temple, the golden menorah, the table of showbread, and silver trumpets were carried through the streets of Rome, a public humiliation of a defeated people. This moment is immortalized on the Arch of Titus, which still stands in Rome today, a stone monument to a victory that echoed through history. For the Jewish people, the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Second Temple was a catastrophe beyond imagination. It ended the era of temple-based sacrificial Judaism that had been the center of their faith for 1,000 years. But it did not end Judaism. In the face of this disaster, a profound transformation began. A Pharisaic sage named Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, realizing the war was lost, had his students smuggle him out of the besieged city in a coffin. He went to the Roman camp and got permission from Vespasian to establish a small academy in the town of Yavne. This seemingly small act was one of the most important in Jewish history. From this little school, Rabbinic Judaism emerged, a faith that could survive without a temple or a homeland, centered instead on the study of the Torah, on prayer, and on community. It was this revolutionary adaptation that allowed the Jewish people and their faith not only to survive, but to thrive through centuries of diaspora. The fall of Jerusalem is a terrifying lesson in the destructive power of empires and the catastrophic results of internal division. It's a story where Roman cruelty collided with Jewish fanaticism. But at its heart, it's a deeply human tragedy about how political betrayal and a refusal to unite against a common enemy can cause a self-inflicted wound far deeper than an outside foe could ever inflict. The stones of the temple were torn down, But the story of why they fell, a warning about the human cost of hatred, both from without and within, is as important today as it was 2,000 years ago. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the real events behind the legends. And let us know in the comments what piece of history you'd like us to tackle next. Thanks for watching.